Thank you for tuning in to The Truth Talks. I'm Psychetruth correspondent Karina Rachel. I want to start by asking you if you've ever heard of military mind control. Did you know that between the 1940s and 1970s, the CIA was conducting top secret mind control experiments? Or is that something you're skeptical about, or maybe have never even heard of before? Leave your comment and let me know. Today I'm talking with Dr. Colin Ross. He is an author and practicing psychiatrist based in Dallas, Texas, and we're going to be talking about his book, Military Mind Control. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, nice to be here.
So I guess just get started letting us know what military mind control is and what people should know about military mind control.
Well, it's exactly what it says. It's the military doing things that we call mind control, which is kind of a loose umbrella term. And it's really studying how to investigate a situation, get inside somebody's mind, extract information from them, so it's interrogation, or control their behavior, influence their thinking. So it's trying to control, influence somebody's mind and behavior.
Right. So in previous videos, we discussed MK-Ultra and other CIA experiments that were going on. What else would you direct people to, or what else do you think is important for people to know about these experiments that were going on?
Well, there's a lot of them. They were funded by the CIA, the various branches of the military. Sometimes the U.S. Public Health Service participated, National Institute of Health, and the money would kind of shift back and forth. So it's a mixture of military money, CIA, general government money. And the experiments were done not in some secret lab way underground somewhere, but all the major universities, Johns Hopkins, Yale, Harvard, Cornell, Tulane, UCLA, the list goes on and on. Mm-hmm. And the experimenters were really leading figures in medicine in general and in psychiatry. And all of this is completely documented, completely based on facts. And it spanned really got going in the Second World War and then goes up to the early 70s. Then almost all of it is still classified since then.
So interrogation techniques is probably the main thing that most people are familiar with. And clearly it would make sense that investigating interrogation techniques would be something that the military would be doing. But in terms of actual mind control that is used for the purpose of controlling people's behavior or making people act in certain ways or do certain things, what are the implications of that kind of research, and how was that used? Just on soldiers, or?
Well, at the experimental level, there was many different groups of people who were experimented on. Mental health patients, prisoners, drug addict, drug offender type prisoners, terminal cancer patients, military personnel, and also unwitting civilians. So civilian populations who didn't know they were being subjected to radiation, different kinds of germs, LSD. So there's many, many different groups have been targeted.
So people without any prior knowledge and without any consent were actually being experimented on in these experiments?
Right, and that would include injecting them with plutonium without their knowledge or consent, having prostitutes pick them up in bars, take them back to a safe house, slip them LSD without their knowledge. Things that you would think would be impossible that are completely documented and factual.
Wow. So what are the ethical implications of doing something like that to someone that they don't know about, and then all of the repercussions that could happen as a result?
Well, the ethics are pretty obvious. It completely violates all kind of human decency, human rights, democratic freedoms, and basic medical ethics. So it's kind of the military is on the hook for violating the principles of democracy, basically, and the medical doctors who participated additionally are violating medical ethics and the Hippocratic Oath. The implications are some people got serious pneumonias from some of the germs that were spread around in the San Francisco Bay Area. Other people suddenly become psychotic. They're hallucinating. They're on an acid trip. They don't know why. They think they're going crazy. And part of the problem with experiments is no follow-up. So we don't know, and nobody took the responsibility of checking to find out some of these people kill themselves or end up in a mental hospital, or did they do fine, or what happened.
So would you be able to throw out a ballpark estimate of how many people might fall into that category?
No. So the yes part is in 1976 or 7, the General Counsel for the Army released a set of documents, and this is at Senate committee hearings, where he listed 125 different compounds that have been tested by the military, by the Army alone. And he said that about 1,500 people had been tested with LSD, but the documents clearly show it was at least 4,000. So that's 4,000 people with LSD, 125 different compounds that were tested, some probably on fewer than 4,000 people. But that's just the Army, and that's just drug testing.
Right.
So when you start doing the arithmetic, it would look like probably at least hundreds of thousands of people were exposed to, at least once, to some sort of mind control experimentation. Yeah. It's not just a couple hundred, a couple thousand. Right. Now, the number who are actually involved in really intensive, prolonged mind control would be quite a bit less, and that's where the answer is I don't know. I don't know how many people were in the really intense program, sort of like in the Bourne movies, where you're recruited in a natural program and then you become operational. Mm-hmm. That's not just fiction. That's clearly shown in the documents that people were brought into prolonged mind control training and then used operationally. Wow. But how many, I don't know.
Interesting. And the numbers that you just mentioned, this is just from the data that's actually been declassified. There's still a significant amount of documentation which is still classified and unable to even be examined. Is that true?
Right. We just know the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
And we know nothing about the iceberg from early 70s on, basically.
Right. And I think that's interesting that you mentioned the movie, The Bourne Identity, because people go and enjoy these movies. And, I don't think most of us realize that it's, probably more factual than any of us would really like to feel comfortable admitting.
It's kind of like if you go to the movies and you watch a Western. Well, of course, it's a made-up story and the characters aren't exactly from a documentary, but there are cowboys, there are horses. There was wars with the Indians back in the 19th century. So most of the details are actually factual and real.
So in terms of your book, Military Mind Control, you're actually going through a more particular case study. Can you talk a little bit more in detail about that?
Yeah, that book, which is not too terribly long, is basically my notes from one of the people I worked with in therapy, who has a copy of the book and has consented to the book being published. And her actual identity is disguised. But she came into my practice in the mid-90s, and several sort of general problems, very isolated and lonely, a lot of anxiety, a lot of panic. And she had already been in therapy with another therapist for a while and had memories of being sexually abused by her dad, some kind of ritual cult-sounding abuse. And she really came to me because it was a little bit too complicated for the therapist that was treating her. And then she was basically transferred to my care, and I've worked with her for quite a number of years. And she made amazing progress and amazing level of recovery. Married, good, solid, sound marriage, functioning well as a mother, 2 well-adjusted children, functioning in a profession in the community. Way, 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 way drastically reduced anxiety symptoms, depression symptoms, amnesia, dissociative kind of symptoms. Mm-hmm. So really a very impressive recovery. But in the story that she told me a little bit of at the beginning and that came out during the course of the therapy, she described being involved in a very structured, very complex military mind control program.
Interesting. Can you elaborate on that program she was involved in?
Sure. And I've heard this kind of story from many dozens of people. So 99% of the time, you can't prove that the story is real, did happen. You can't prove that it isn't real and didn't happen. There's just no way to do either. Mm-hmm. Because you can't just phone up the Army and say, hey, was this woman in one of your programs back in the 70s. So you have to figure out how to do therapy. So now we're inside the therapy, and we're just focused on the person's recovery and feeling better and functioning better. In order to help the person get there, you don't have to know for a fact it did happen. You don't have to know for a fact it didn't happen. Now, if you want to step out of therapy and sue somebody or accuse somebody in public, then you better have some evidence. And what she described basically was pretty typical kind of story, that it was an unhealthy family. And I've interviewed the other members of the family. Her dad is deceased before I met her. Incest from her dad. Her dad was plugged into, he was former military himself, and he was plugged into some suspicious characters, publicly known people actually, who are definitely crime-related suspicious characters. And he basically took her to a military base, we're not sure of the exact location, and repeatedly this training and experimentation was done on her. And it included things that are also in the documents. So these are documented elements of mind control. They're not like totally unheard of. Whether it's actually true, she actually experienced that, can't prove or disprove. But what she's describing is very similar to what's in documents. And that is, first of all, she's a kid. She's taken in there. There's sensory deprivation, isolation type things done to her. There's she's drugged at least on the trip there and the trip back, maybe during the trip. And some of the steps out of the documents a little bit. So she's subjected to training films of various kinds, some memorization exercises. She's terrified, intimidated, threatened in a variety of different ways. There's a bunch of sex gets mixed in, and basically she's parts of her mind are split off, and those parts of her mind, which are the new identities, which are created through a mixture of all these techniques, are then used in sort of practice experiments, basically as prostitutes. So she's having sex with guys who are brought into a room, and it's being observed by the mind control doctors. And there's some sort of mild torture stuff that's done to her just to test whether she can block out pain. That's kind of the quick summary of what was done to her. And then by age 10 or so, she basically completely rebelled about what was going on, kind of flipped out, and attacked a guy that she was supposed to be having sex with, and got kicked out of the program, which was a huge disappointment to her dad. He was very upset and angry about it. Went back home, and then all of that was kind of sealed over and shut down internally. The incest continued, and there's a lot of documented, disturbed behavior by that guy that the other family members have described. So that's the kind of bare bones outline of the story.
It's amazing when you're describing these things. It just sounds appalling. I mean, it sounds completely unbelievable. It sounds like you just have a really hard time believing that something like that could happen. But it's interesting that you note that the things she described were, clearly evidenced in these declassified documents, that clearly she's describing things that were known to have happened.
Well, when we talk about the CIA doctors in another segment, I'll describe some experiments that when I describe them, you'll think, now that's impossible, that's ridiculous, that never happened. There's no way. That's completely documented. So all the different bits and pieces of what she described, a pretty good chunk of it is documented, that the military, the CIA actually did these things to people.
Wow. And so we were speaking a second ago about the ethical implications, and that clearly this is a pretty absurd breach of ethics and even human decency. What kind of, responsibility has been taken for what was done? Has there been any apology or formal?
There's never been a formal apology for mind control experimentation, from the White House, from the military, from the CIA. There's been, in Canada, a small number of cases settled in a court for under $1 million total for 9 people. So there's been a few legal cases